In October 1998, residents of an apartment building in the Mohandasin district of Aguza smelled a foul odor emanating from the apartment of their neighbor, Tahir Bek. The smell worsened day by day, forcing the neighbors to report it. Security forces intervened and found the apartment door locked normally, but the foul smell filled the stairwell. They inquired about the apartment's owner and were informed that his name was Hamdi. He worked in a secret political position, had a law office, lived alone, and only received occasional visits from some guests. The security forces broke into the apartment and the smell led them to Hamdi's bedroom. They opened the door and found the body of a man in his 50s, completely naked, with his hands and feet tied with electrical wire, his head severed from his body, and clear stab wounds in his neck. A team from the criminal lab arrived and confirmed that all entrances to the apartment were intact, indicating that the perpetrator knew Tahir Bek. They also found dishes with remnants of hashish and cigarettes in more than one room. The apartment's layout was uncomfortable as it was very large, and all the rooms showed clear signs of use from the shape of the furniture and beds. The body was taken for an autopsy, and the report stated that the man had been electrocuted with the wire that was tied to him, and that the cause of death was 3 fatal blows to the neck, after which his head was severed with a cleaver. In addition, large quantities of drugs were found in his blood. Even more strangely, the man had been sexually assaulted before his death, and it was proven that this was not the first time, and that the man was, unfortunately, homosexual. The security men began searching the man's history, and were surprised to find that he had worked in a security agency, and was dismissed due to his misconduct. No one knew that he had left the service, and most of those around him believed that his position was secret and sensitive, which is why he opened a large law office as a cover for his original work in security. As for the people who knew that he was out of service, he deceived them into believing that he had resigned and wanted to work in law. When they investigated further, they discovered that the office was not functioning, and there were no cases in it. The security men began investigating his neighbors and learned from them that there were 2 people living with him who were married, named Tahir and Amal, and the nature of their relationship with the victim was strange. The security men shed light on them and were able to obtain personal photos of them. 2 days later, information reached the security men that Hamdi's apartment and car had been sold under a power of attorney to someone. When they searched, they found that the person who bought the apartment was the same person whose picture was in the registry, who was Tahir, who had disappeared from the house with his wife. The strange thing was that the registered name was different, and this is evidence of forgery in the papers he used. Here, the security men were certain that Tahir and his wife were behind the murder for the purpose of robbery, especially since there was no money in the house after the crime was discovered. After legal procedures were completed, the security men received information that Tahir and his wife were in Marsa Matruh. They tightened the noose on them and were able to reach their exact location, which led to a series of strange and disgusting confessions. The story began when Tahir, a simple Egyptian young man, was unable to find a job that would provide a decent life for his family. Tahir was married to Amal, and they had 2 children, one 4 years old and the other 1 year old, and they were deprived of their simplest rights in life. They did not even have a house to live in together, and for this reason, they moved from time to time between the homes of their relatives. Tahir did his best to find a job to support his family. Tahir's mother, a simple woman, felt sorry for her grandchildren and her son, so she offered him the idea of going down to Egypt and meeting his cousin who works in a high position. She did not know exactly the nature of his work. All she knew was that he was a person with great influence in the state, and she thought that he would be able to provide a job for her son. Tahir did not hesitate, so he took his wife and son and traveled to Hamdi Bek and went to his office and introduced himself. From the moment he entered, Hamdi felt sympathy for him, and decided to employ him in his house, to run his errands and requests, while his wife would be responsible for taking care of the house and arranging it, and answering the phones in his absence. In return for all of this, he would provide them with a separate room inside his house where they would live with him, especially since he lived alone. Tahir and Amal were happy with the new job, and they took their children and went with them to Amal's mother, until they took over the job and arranged their affairs. From the first day they went there, they furnished their own room, and their strange journey began in the new world. Hamdi Bek went to his office and Amal and Tahir sat arranging the strange house. The apartment was large and spacious and furnished with the most luxurious furniture. The strange thing was that the phone bell did not stop ringing, and the strangest thing was that all the calls were from men asking about the names of some women, and their way of speaking included uncomfortable innuendos. Amal said to her husband, "We have nothing to do with it. The important thing is that we have found a place to live and a job to earn a living from, honestly." A few hours later, Hamdi Bek returned to the house, and as soon as he sat down to rest, he took out from his pocket a paper wrapped in something strange, divided it in half, and asked Tahir to put part of it on the hookah for him, and asked Amal to put the rest in a cup of tea. Tahir discovered that what he had was a piece of hashish. Tahir and Amal entered the kitchen, and it was clear that they were surprised. How could a person in this sensitive political position use drugs? But their conversation ended with the fact that they had nothing to do with it, and they had to maintain their livelihood, and it is possible that this is his mood so that he can do the work. Amal presented the cup of tea, and Tahir arranged the hookah for Hamdi Bek, who began to drink it and drink tea with it, while asking about what happened in his absence from the house. They informed him of the nature of the calls that came, so he told them that this was normal, and they had to get used to it and that they should record all the names of the people who call in his absence. Tahir was very surprised, and what interrupted his surprise was the ringing of the doorbell. Tahir opened the door and was surprised to find that there were 4 men coming and asking about Hamdi Bek, who as soon as he heard their voices, got up quickly and welcomed them and received them. After a while the bell rang again, and 4 girls with an uncomfortable appearance entered and sat with the 4 men in the same room, and Hamdi signaled to them that each of them should go to the room and lock the door. Of course, the general shape is clear. Hamdi Bek was allocating his apartment for exactly anything. Tahir and his wife entered the kitchen, and they were in a state of discontent and anxiety about the nature of Hamdi Bek's work. Their thinking was interrupted by his voice coming from outside, calling Tahir, and asking him to follow him to the bedroom. Tahir was very surprised, so Hamdi continued and said to him, "Enter you and your wife." There he asked Tahir the most terrible request you can imagine. Hamdi Bek was, unfortunately, homosexual, and asked Tahir to have an inappropriate relationship with him. In return, he would pay him a large sum of money. Tahir was furious with him and started yelling, and calmly, Hamdi Bek took out the personal cards of Tahir and his wife, and started threatening them that he could fabricate charges against them, the simplest 2 charges of which were that they broke into his apartment in his absence, and stole valuable belongings from it. Hamdi Bek's steadfastness was terrifying, and his history that Tahir knew that he worked in a sensitive position made him afraid. After a long insistence, Tahir agreed to carry out his request. After Tahir finished what was asked of him, he went out and found that the men who were in the room had also left, and left an envelope for Hamdi Bek, inside which was an amount of about 1,500 pounds. They went down from the apartment, and Hamdi Bek went out to pay the girls, so he gave each one 500 pounds, and took out 200 pounds from the envelope, and gave it to Tahir and his wife, as the first payment for their work in the house. This money in the 90s was a large sum of money that tempts anyone. Tahir and Amal spent the whole night thinking about what happened. They were very disgusted by what they were in, and they decided that they had to leave this house in any way. The next day, Hamdi Bek took Tahir to the Katkat area. There, he introduced him to a strange person named the Doctor, and Tahir later learned that he was a drug dealer. Hamdi asked the man to fulfill all of Tahir's requests because he had become his man and was responsible for all requests and errands of this kind. They returned together to the house, and the same scenario was repeated. But this time Hamdi asked that Tahir's wife attend the session with them, and that she participate in it in everything that is perverse and contrary to Sharia and morals. Amal tried to refuse, but after many threats, the wife submitted to these requests. One day, Tahir went out to run errands for Hamdi, and when he returned, he was surprised to find Amal crying hysterically. Hamdi had forced her to perform immoral acts with him, and in front of the strange world that Tahir and Amal had entered. After the situation developed, they decided to flee to their country and hide there until the situation calmed down. But Hamdi was watching them and renewed his threats. He vowed that as soon as he put them in prison, he would recommend them, and they would not get out of there again. Unfortunately, Tahir and his wife returned with him, and Hamdi's requests were endless, and his perversions were increasing day by day. One day, Hamdi asked Tahir to issue a new card with a new address and a different name, of course a forged card, so that he could use it in the scams he was carrying out. Tahir and his wife decided to flee again and went to Amal's mother, but Hamdi was able to reach them and repeated his threats. Tahir and his wife returned with him to the house, but this time they had their young son with them, who was 1 year old, so they could not leave him more than that with his grandmother. Days pass, and Tahir turns into a servant of Hamdi, carrying out all his orders, whether it be scams or buying drugs, or facilitating prostitution inside the house. This life did not please him or his wife, despite the large sums of money they were getting. One day, Tahir was sitting complaining alone about the girls who frequent the house, and that he was no longer able to continue doing what he was doing, so Amal offered him to bring her son, who was a teenager, to fulfill Hamdi's requests, in exchange for taking 100 pounds each time. Tahir was happy, because he was able to get rid of Hamdi's perverse actions, and when he presented the idea to him, he welcomed it very much. But the surprise was that Hamdi included the boy with Tahir and his wife, so that everyone would be at his service and serve his requests. The situation was getting worse every day, to the point that he asked them one day to bring their young son with them to the room, so that he would get used to what he would see from him as a child, as his tendencies were strange and disgusting. He was not satisfied with this, but asked them to give up the child to him so that he could adopt him and write him in his name. Of course, Tahir and Amal refused. The most heinous thing was that he asked them to film their relationship with him with a camera that he bought specifically. He was not concerned with documenting his perversions. All he cared about was satisfying his desires and his perverse tendencies. In the face of his insistence, Tahir said to his wife, "Pretend that you are filming and do not press the button, as he will not be aware because he will be under the influence of drugs." After they finished this strange night, they fled from the house in order to save their son. However, Hamdi was able to reach them, and offered them to return with him to spend a farewell party, a night in which they would do everything, and it would be the last night for them, after which he would hand them their cards, and each of them would go their own way. Tahir and Amal agreed, and returned with him. Their return this time was different from every time. There was a strange determination inside them that these things must all end immediately. Indeed, after they prepared the base and carried out all his orders and requests, Hamdi asked Amal to prepare a cup of tea for him, and put 1 pill of the drug in it. However, Tahir asked his wife to put 5 pills. When Hamdi drank the tea, he lost consciousness. At this moment, Tahir brought an electrical wire and began to electrocute Hamdi, but after a while he woke up and began to resist Tahir. Tahir began to wrap the wire around his hands and feet so that he would not be able to resist or escape, and brought a knife that was in the room and began to hit him in the neck to make sure he was dead. After that, he brought a cleaver and began to separate his head from his body. After he finished his mission, he and his wife began cleaning the place, and stole the keys to the apartment and the car and the papers that were there, even the forged power of attorney that he had made for him, and with which he sold Hamdi's own property, but with the forged name in the new card. He and his wife fled to Marsa Matruh. After the police arrested them, they insisted that they were victims, and that they were innocent, and that Hamdi deserved more than that. The security men did not believe her tears, and they and the judges were determined that they were guilty and that they were greedy for the money they were taking, and for this reason, they practiced everything that was perverse with Hamdi, and when they were more greedy, they decided to kill him in order to seize all his property. They were sentenced to death so that the curtain would fall on one of the cases that it is difficult for the human mind to believe that it exists in the society in which we live.